Hello, I'm Sean McGinty, and this is Digital Awakening, streaming live on LinkedIn, on X, and quite possibly YouTube, and of course available on your favourite podcasting app and the ones that you irrationally snub. As a presenter, journalist, and digital storyteller for the BBC for 23 years, I've helped all kinds of people tell more than 10,000 stories, generating millions of views and engagements. Now I help people and businesses tell their story better. Give me a shout on X or on LinkedIn, because we both know that you could improve how you express who you are to the world. In the coming weeks, I'll go live on here and chat to all manner of people about their story, but also about some more important issues for everyone in life. This Friday at 11 a.m. UK time, I'll be talking to Jack and Zach from We Have a Meeting. They help businesses get sales in more than a few different ways. They are also two very intelligent people who have a remarkable grasp of the levers that deliver high sales. Today's interview was recorded last week, and I'll be back live at the end of it. Now to my guest today. Full disclosure here, I am a vegetarian and I have been for more than 3 decades. And I'm a vegetarian mainly because, to take the name of an album by the Smiths, I believe meat is murder. However, I do understand people eat meat and they need to farm animals to produce it, and until humans change their eating habits, that's where we are. I just don't believe we humans need to be cruel when we do that. It's not a new idea. In fact, my guest today is from Compassion in World Farming. Welcome to James West, who is the Public Affairs Manager. Hi, James.
Hi, Sean. How are you?
Really well, thanks. Now, it's been a very busy week for you, and we'll get to the parliamentary stuff later. But I kind of thought it'd be an interesting thing to look at the history of Compassion in World Farming. And you've got a lovely little video on your YouTube. I'm just going to play that now, and then we'll pick up after that.
It could be argued that this hen is quite different from those in the cages, but I must tell you that it's only 2 years since this one was set free from a cage. It was just the same as those 2 years ago.
We did it!
We have to change the mental environment, not only in this country but in the world, to such an extent that broiler sheds and battery cages and live exports will become not only unacceptable but unthinkable.
The world now produces 80 billion land animals and twice as many fish every year for food. Most of these animals are factory farmed. Resetting the balance means switching to welfare-friendly, nature-positive production systems with a shift to mostly plant-based diets. Otherwise, we could lose all of this, and that would be unthinkable. In the next chapter of our story, we need a radical change in the way we produce food, ending our reliance on animal-sourced foods before it's too late.
So there you go. That's the that's kind of the history, really, of Compassion in World Farming. And what I was struck by that, because there have been a lot of achievements, haven't there? You almost forget just how many achievements there've been in world farming.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been going almost 60 years. 1967, we were formed by Peter Roberts, the first person you saw in that clip there, who was a farmer by trade. He had a visit from somebody at the Ministry of Agriculture, as it was in the day, who said, you could make a lot more money if you kind of farmed broilers, meat chickens intensively, essentially. And he thought, well, I'm really not up for that. So he and his wife started Compassion in World Farming around their kitchen table. Like you say, kind of developed, alternative meat products. And but yeah, there've been lots of wins kind of through the years. Ban on battery cages across Europe, UK sow stall ban, partial sow stall ban in the EU. We recently banned live exports in the UK, or from Great Britain at least. Recognising animals as sentient beings, some of the other things that were mentioned in that video, there have been some significant wins, but there's also a lot to do.
Yeah, and you are constantly at it. I follow Compassion in World Farming on various social medias, and you are constantly trying to put forward a fairer and more compassionate way to farm animals. But this isn't just for the veggies and the vegans, is it? This is supported really by everybody that eats meat, or a lot of people that eat meat. The numbers of people who support a more compassionate way of farming is most people.
Yes. I think, certainly in the UK, but I think by and large, internationally, there's a lot of support for improving animal welfare. I mean, the UK is sort of recognised as a nation of animal lovers, or a self-styled nation of animal lovers. But yeah, we're a broad church, I guess. We have some of our supporters will be vegan or vegetarian, some will be will eat meat, some will be pescatarian or flexitarian. And I guess in that sense, our position isn't that radical compared to some groups. We're not kind of calling for the abolition of farming, or for kind of everybody to adopt a vegan lifestyle. Although if people do want to, then great. But simply for kind of the standards that animals endure when they are farmed to be higher, essentially. And I think that's something that most people can get behind. So one of the things we push for is sort of what we call less and better. So ideally, people would be eating less meat, but when they do, it would be produced to higher standards of animal welfare. And you only need to look at sort of the sale of cage-free eggs in the last 20 years or so. Back in the mid-noughties, it's about 30% were cage-free of eggs sold in the UK. It's now, I think the minister said in the debate on Monday, it's something like 82, 83%. So, the trajectory is maybe not the same for kind of other animal sourced food products, but I think there is kind of an increasing trend towards higher welfare food. And people want to sort of know that what they've eaten or what they are eating has come from an animal that hasn't suffered kind of unnecessary pain.
Yeah, absolutely. It's strange. I actually gave up eating eggs for quite a long time, and then came across a local farm who sells its produce in a little box, and a farm shop as well when I can go there. But now I've started eating eggs again, because I've looked at how they do that, and I think that is a compassionate way of producing eggs, and it doesn't seem such a leap for it to be done across the board in the way that all animals are farmed. I mean, what are the blockers there? What are the things we're going to talk about crates and cages well, explain what happened. I've forgotten the name of it's a petition, isn't it? That you go through the parliamentary system, more than 100,000 signatures. You end up in a debate room with some MPs.
Essentially, yes. So the UK Parliament have a system whereby anybody can submit a petition to Parliament, so long as the topic's kind of within the responsibilities of the Parliament or the UK government. And within a space of 6 months, the petition has to secure 100,000 signatures. The petition committee, which is a committee made up of MPs in the Houses of Parliament, then consider all of those petitions that get to 100,000 signatures to decide whether to take it on for a debate. Essentially, an MP on the committee has to say, yes, I would like to lead this debate. So the petition you mentioned was started in January, late January. I think it got to 20,000 signatures kind of by the end of the weekend. It went live on the Friday morning, and by the Sunday night, it was on 20,000 plus signatures. It's now on, because technically, although it's already been debated, it's technically still live to the end of its 6-month window, which is the 24th of July, I think. It's on 105,000 signatures now. It was started by Joanna Lumley, who's very passionate about these issues. And yes, MPs come to Parliament and they can attend that particular debate on the petition and speak in support or in opposition to what that petition or any other petition being debated is calling for.
We'll come to that, so I've got a little clip from the sort of opening of that debate. Was that the debate on the petition, or was that something separate then?
That was the debate on the petition.
That was,
yes.
Yeah, despite it sort of having... So it got its 100,000 before the end of its time, and therefore it ended up... how does that system work for you? I mean, it's obviously something that... It's a tough news week, let's be honest.
Yeah.
You know, for any of these kind of issues to push the way up. But, you know, perhaps on a better news week, we'd have heard more about it in the mainstream media and across all medias. But how do those work for you? Do you feel that's a kind of a useful part of our democracy?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's... 100,000 signatures is a significant amount of signatures. So it kind of... not all, in fact, probably most petitions probably don't get there. I think it's kind of democracy in action, I guess. And it then gives MPs the opportunity to speak about it. And actually how the system works from an MP point of view is that they can look at the petition and see how many people, because to sign a petition, you have to put in the postcode for where you live to verify that you're a UK resident. And MPs can then see how many of their constituents have signed it. So in the debate, we heard a couple of MPs say, I've actually got the constituency with the most support for this petition. So MPs can kind of see in real terms how important their constituents think it is. Because I guess for any issue, various parts of the country might be more concerned about an issue or not, or there might be an urban-rural divide or whatever it is. But it allows MPs, rather than just kind of go an MP thinking, well, okay, 100,000 signatures, but what does this mean to me? There is actually kind of a tool that allows them to see how many of their own constituents signed it.
And there is I think I said before, it's an overwhelming. There are a number of different surveys done in the UK over the last, say, 5 years or so. And in all cases, really, you're looking at certainly more than 75% support to end cage farming and to, in principle, kind of end suffering in farming as far as you can. It's quite the majority, it would seem, in the UK to do that. Why do you think it's so hard to make some progress on some of the areas where you feel you haven't?
Good question. I mean, like you say, the public support is, and has been for a long time, very strong on this. And I think MPs and the government, to be fair, recognise that there is strong support for improving animal welfare, farmed animal welfare, and animal welfare more generally. I think, well, there are several challenges. One, there are kind of, I guess, particularly in a farming sense, there is, at the end of the day, it requires the farmer in question or the farmers operating with that particular species to be willing to make that change, to be financially able to make that change. Potentially it requires, if one or other of those hurdles can't be hit, for the government to provide financial support, or for the government to legislate to ban a certain practice if it's kind of not being done by any other means.
Sure.
And as you said, there's so much going on in the world. Government has a lot of things to deal with. So kind of finding time to draw up legislation, to then pass it through Parliament, whether that's because it's a bill in its own right, like the live exports bill was, or whether kind of a more sort of regulatory change, all takes time. Having said that, I think it's been clear on the use of cages in particular, that there has kind of been long-standing kind of opposition to their use, or kind of majority support for phasing them out. And I think it's kind of time now for the government to get on and do that. Really, they've this government and the previous government have both recognised that it's an issue that needs addressing, and yet as we speak, it still hasn't been addressed, kind of in terms of legislation.
And that's a UK problem? That's an issue. So give me some examples as to what we're doing in the UK which you'd like to stop.
So in the UK, I guess the main two, or the big two for compassionate wild farming, are the use of enriched cages for laying hens. So in 2012, the UK and the EU banned the use of barren battery cages, but they were replaced by what's called enriched cages. So essentially there's a perch, there's a scratching pad, but it's a cage is a cage, essentially. What are we at now? As I say, 80% or so of eggs are now free range, or cage free at least. All of the major supermarkets have committed to phasing out the use of cages for laying hens. Some kind of in store, some of them already have: Waitrose, Sainsbury's, M&S, some others. Our estimate is by the time that the supermarkets get to the end of this year, which is when the commitment is for phasing out the use of cages for laying hens, that will be at probably about 90% cage free. So at that point, it really is kind of, I think probably without the legislation, that 10% is probably going to be quite stubborn. Then the other big one, which all falls under our kind of End the Cage Age campaign, is the use of farrowing crates for pigs, which is essentially for about a week before a mother pig gives birth, and for then the 4 weeks afterwards, while the piglets are being weaned, the mother pig is put in a crate, and the crate is essentially as wide as the pig. So the pig can stand up, lay down, they can't turn around. They're essentially immobilized for 5 weeks for each pregnancy, and a sow will have 2 to 3 pregnancies per year. So potentially up to 15 weeks per year, they might be in these systems 24/7.
That's pretty hard to watch, those videos. I do make myself do it, even though I don't obviously eat pigs myself. I do make myself watch them from time to time, because you want to keep across what's going on in the world, with sentient animals. And it's not just that pigs are cute or cows are cute, or I love chickens or whatever. These are sentient beings, aren't they? And your job must be really tough, because I think you know where you want to go, but it seems to me there's a lot of people sort of in the way who are agreeing with you.
Yeah, that's quite a nice way to put it, actually. I think I think we saw that in the debate, actually. Even MPs who sort of spoke in opposition to outright banning of particularly farrowing crates, I think was the issue that came up there. They still acknowledged that there was kind of an issue with the farrowing crate itself. I mean, our position is we would like to see all kind of close confinement systems end, essentially, which is why we have this End the Cage Age, and crates and cages are sort of the most obvious examples of that. But I mean, like you say, these are sentient beings. They kind of have personalities. They're intelligent. They have needs, and they feel and experience pain and suffering. And so, trying to reduce that as much as possible in our food system is kind of not really that radical, or at least it shouldn't be. But
nor is it sort of that expensive or difficult to achieve in many respects.
Yeah, I think it depends on the sort of which species you're looking at. I guess I think in the case of eggs, so the Scottish government did consult on phasing out cages for laying hens last year, and I think their calculations worked out that it would be something like 1 pence more per egg at the kind of point of production.
Yeah.
with other products, it potentially is more expensive. I think probably free range pork is probably more expensive, it is more expensive than kind of baseline standard pork. But that's partly why we encourage a less and better. We're not saying that people should kind of carry on consuming the same amount of food they do and at a higher price. You replace some of that meat, eggs, dairy with sort of alternatives.
So at this point now, I tell you what, I'm going to play a little clip of Irene Campbell MP. Okay. It's just as she opened this. Was it called a debate, or what was it actually described as?
It's a petition debate, and it's in Westminster Hall, and you do have Westminster Hall debates. So a Westminster Hall debate on an e-petition, I guess, is probably a slightly wordy title.
Yes, I know. It does. You try and get it right, but then sometimes you just have to pick a word and go, look, it might be a bit wrong, but let's go with it. No, I understand. But this is Irene Campbell MP, and I assume it's the chair kind of kicking her off on this.
Order Irene Campbell to move the motion.
Beg to move that this House has considered e-petition 706-302 relating to the use of cages and crates for farmed animals. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Mundell. The petition is named End the Use of Cages and Crates for All Farmed Animals and was created by Dame Joanna Lumley. This petition has reached over 105,000 signatures, and the petition reads, "We think the UK government must ban all cages for laying hens as soon as possible. We think it should also ban the use of all cages and crates for all farmed animals, including farrowing crates for sows, individual calf pens and cages for other birds."
That's the key thing, isn't it, here? That it's really clear what you're asking for. It's a very, very clear motion, as it were, in a debating situation. How realistic is it? So we're talking about some, but not many, although it'll be in the millions of chickens that will still be in cages in the UK. Can you give me any sense of scale as to pig production in the UK? And I think it was mentioned about calves being in cages. Is that something we do?
Yes. I don't have the numbers for the calves. For laying hens, like you say, it's 7 million, around 7 million hens. Around 7 million hens are kept in cages each year. The UK laying hen flock is kind of 40 to 45 million, and around 20% of those are still kept in cages. So, as you say, it is in the millions. But I think kind of supermarket action, consumer awareness, demand for cage-free eggs has certainly shifted it significantly. And I think hope that the government will sort of act to make sure that the sort of final 10 to 20% is kind of addressed by essentially legislating to phase out those cages.
Yeah.
With farrowing crates, it's around 50% of the UK pig herd free farrows in outdoor systems. Then of the remaining 50%, I think about 8% of them are in kind of flexible farrowing or free farrowing systems, so not in farrowing crates. It's the remaining 40-ish% that are still in those systems, which is roughly 150 to 160,000 sows. So it's not a huge number. The issue is that the systems that we're calling for require more space. Because the sow needs space to move around, for her welfare, for the piglet's welfare, and that requires, so there is a cost implication in terms of adapting systems or building new barns, whatever it might be, to facilitate that higher welfare standard in farming. But we've kind of always supported the government introducing, so the government have these animal health and welfare grants, and they have small scale grants and large scale grants. And what they have not yet published, neither the previous government or this government, is sort of how the large scale grants will work for the pig sector in terms of improving housing. we would like some of that pot of money to be allocated towards helping with the shift away from farrowing crates,
Sure.
towards free farrowing, so that to make it easier, so, to remove one of those kind of obstacles to ending the use of crates in pig farming.
The only parallel I can think of is, and it's probably not a great one, but off the top of my head, if a manufacturer of paints, or to be honest, anything, you can make it even broader than I was going to go. I was going to say lead in paint, but if a manufacturer of anything has a government has new evidence and it changes the law and it says we can't supply that to the public anymore because we think it might be dangerous, or for whatever reason they don't want to supply it to the public anymore, and the government goes, okay. It's not often the government hands out money to old paint suppliers that can't modernise. And, we all understand we need food in the country and we need to support farmers in many ways, but I'm sensing that a lot of these, and it may not be easy for you to talk about this, and if it's not, James, don't worry, because you've got to be kind of an ambassador for compassion in world farming. But I sort of wonder whether these are big companies really that are doing this, or it seems to me like the smaller farms, in the research I've done, are actually pretty good at adapting and changing the way they work. And they see actually a real positivity in being more compassionate in the way they bring up their animals. And I sense that the sort of the larger sort of more industrial farming groups are complaining, don't want to do it, and want some money out of the government. Is that fair?
In part, I guess, yeah. I mean, I think, so from a kind of farm scale point of view, our preference would be, our belief is that, you reach a point where the farm becomes so big, it kind of becomes very difficult to sort of keep an eye on the welfare of each individual animal. They sort of, they cease to become an individual and become kind of just part of the system. I think in terms of the cost, whether it's a farmer that's got space for, say, 50 farrowing crates or 500 farrowing crates, the cost to change each crate per crate is still going to be the same, or broadly the same. So in that sense, that funding would be required for sort of regardless of the size of the farm. It's just, I guess, a bigger farm would require more money because they'd have more spaces.
They'd have more money to spend, stuff to change that they need to do. Yeah.
And I think in terms of companies, I mean, there are some giant companies kind of involved in kind of I don't know, fertilizer companies or grain providing companies, whatever it might be. But I think in terms of a lot, not all, but a lot of farmers will have a contract with a particular company supplier, and will farm to the standard that that supplier requires in order to maintain that contract. So, which is why one of the things we're calling for is method of production labelling on pack. So in the same way you have, an egg will say, an egg package rather will say barn cage, free range, organic, and people can then purchase at their kind of preferred welfare level. But you don't really get that with any other product.
No.
There are some labels, but they're kind of people are probably not entirely clear what they mean. And in other cases, you get things like farm fresh or something, which are kind of completely meaningless, really, because there's no sort of requirement for the standard that's met to be able to put that on a packet. And so what we would like is that kind of the way that labelling works for eggs to be extended to other sectors, because then the consumer can play their part in helping to drive up standards by saying, oh, actually, I don't know, say it's chicken, for example. They might say, well, tier 3 or tier 2 or whatever, I'm happy with that level, so that's the point I'll buy at. And then, as I say, that might mean that they have one less meal with meat in it during the week, and they replace it with legumes, pulses, vegetables, corn, whatever it might be.
Joanna Lumley, obviously a remarkable actor and feisty woman in a number of campaigns over the years. When did she first get involved with compassion in world farming?
Good question. It's now been decades for sure. I couldn't tell you exactly when.
Yeah, I thought so.
But she's been kind of, I remember one of the first kind of work stunts, I guess, I did when I joined Compassion was, it must have been around Christmas 2012. And we had a big kind of red London bus with adverts on it about banned live exports. And she kind of came to London for a photo call for that. But sort of well before then, she went to Parliament at some point with kind of, there was a pig involved. I can't remember the exact details, but she's been, and not just in the UK, she's kind of sort of campaigned in Brussels whilst we're in the EU and, elsewhere as well.
Yeah.
But, she's been very passionate for a very long time. She's a great advocate for what we're calling for.
A quick bit of a random question, and I've got a kind of a nice little positive film that you guys have produced that's on your YouTube channel. And I guess partly it's this. If, coming back to sort of chickens and eggs, if most of the supermarkets have kind of got behind this, the thing that I struggle with is, if you go and eat somewhere and they've got eggs, I wouldn't tend to want to have those eggs. But then you've got eggs that will end up in cake or whatever, kind of this massive conglomerate food manufacturing process. And we all eat that rubbish from time to time, even though we probably feel guilty about it. Should we feel more guilty? Are there more likely to be cruelty-laden eggs in products that we buy from big companies, big food products?
I would say probably yes. I caveat over probably because I suspect, eggs is a good example, because it appears in cakes, in pasta, in, kind of ingredients in whatever it might be. But I would imagine that if it was a free range egg, they would be being labelled as free range either on the restaurant menu or in the kind of, this is a egg mayo sandwich made with free range eggs or whatever it might be. But I think this, again, is where kind of labelling has been helpful because people now understand broadly what the kind of welfare standards are in the egg sector.
Yeah.
And so you now end up with a situation where, take Hellmann's mayonnaise or Sainsbury's mayonnaise, for example, they use free range eggs. The label says made from free range eggs, but they're not obliged to label it as free range eggs. That law around egg labeling only applies to the shell egg, but because there's this awareness, people then think, oh, okay, but this has got egg in it. Am I content with? So, which is why, again, so the government recently the last government consulted on method of production labeling. That consultation closed in May last year, and just last week, the government published a summary of responses, and the findings were kind of overwhelmingly in favour. It's kind of 99% of the public who responded supported method of production labelling, and around 2/3 of organisations, because obviously you have a broad range of organisations from the retailers, animal welfare organisations, farming bodies, 99% supported introducing method of production labelling, applying to imported and domestic products, and for it to be UK-wide. And the original proposal was on kind of fresh products in store for pig meat and chicken meat. So it would apply to bacon and pork chops, but it wouldn't apply to, I don't know, a chicken and bacon pie, for example.
Sure.
But potentially, in an ideal world, this was how it was consulted on, that's kind of how it would start, but it would be developed in a way that would allow for it to be extended to the catering sector, the out-of-home eating sector, processed products. And even if that took a while, I think as a result of having that label, there would then become kind of, okay, well, that pork chop I was thinking of buying is, outdoor, free range or organic or whatever it might be. But what about, this pork pie?
Yeah.
and retailers might then start to think, okay, well, I'm losing market share here because people now expect, and my competitors are providing, their pork pies, whatever it might be, with higher welfare pork, and I now need to up my game. And actually, Waitrose have recently introduced their own method of production label, animal welfare label, in store. Came out, I think, in April. So again, supermarkets are kind of taking this issue on themselves, which is great from sort of Waitrose's point of view. But ideally, what you want is sort of a government-led initiative where everybody's using the same, tiering system, the same standards. Because we don't want somebody to go into a different supermarket, see a different label, and be confused. I mean, at the moment, that's not a problem because it's just Waitrose who are doing it, which, fair play to them, because it's sort of, it would be great if everyone else was as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. It doesn't seem a desperately hard thing to achieve, really, does it? I mean, every producer of food, even if it's in a factory or, one of those huge production companies, down to, a small building somewhere producing local produce and cakes, you know where you're getting your eggs from. It's not hard to achieve. And I think that would then give people the information they need to make the choice that they want to make as to whether they might pay a penny more for a pork pie or whatever it is. How do you think the government's going to manage to do that? Do you think any government can? It's not a political question, but do you think...
I think the method of production labelling is relatively straightforward, certainly for kind of fresh produce. I mean, you could get into the kind of logistics of how you then implement it on a menu. I mean, ideally, if it, as a minimum, you could have a page at the back that says, all of our pork meets tier 2 or higher, all of our chicken meets tier 4 or higher, whatever it might be, rather than needing to label each individual product. But then, you quite often go to restaurants and you will see that, I don't know, the breakfast will say 2 free-range eggs.
Absolutely.
I think where the company, the individual, the restaurant, whoever it might be, is using them, they want to label it because they know that it's good marketing, if nothing else. And so because it's what people expect. But I think
also we put calories. Sorry to cut across you, but also we you have to put calories somewhere within a restaurant when you're part of your description or some small print somewhere. You have to have something where everybody can assess what the calories are. So it doesn't seem a massive leap just to say where your eggs are from and where your meat's from.
Yeah, and as long as the kind of the suppliers are clear on where they're sourcing their product from, and I think this is possibly part of the problem, because I think it may well be that some of the egg product, for example, that's being used may well still be being imported from battery cages. Which is why one of the things we're calling for is for imports to have to meet the same standard as is expected of UK farmers, because it's not right that UK farmers operate to a higher standard and then are undercut by somebody who's not doing it and kind of essentially offshoring animal welfare or offshoring bad animal welfare. That is trickier because the government want trade agreements, and it's sort of a slightly inconvenient issue to have to deal with. They seem to have held the line on the ones they've signed recently in terms of the India and the America deal.
But all the more reason to have really easy to understand, well publicised, sensible labelling, which could work across the board, so that you could look at it and go, or it might even just say, the eggs in this have come from abroad, or the meat's come from abroad. We don't know. We can't speak for this.
That's why the government consulted on, whether it should apply just to domestic or also to imported goods. And we very strongly supported that it applies to imported goods as well, because otherwise you end up with, rightly, in our opinion, products being labelled as to sort of the method, the animal welfare standard, if they're produced in the UK, but then anything that comes in from abroad being completely unclear. And there, we do import a fair amount of bacon, for example. So that should also be being labelled to show if there's any differentiation in the standards compared to how the UK producer for the same supermarket has produced or reared their animals.
Yeah. Well, we go down a dark road if we start looking at the way that pigs are treated in the rest of the world, I'm afraid, don't we? So we won't do that now. James, it's been lovely talking to you, and I just want to say how important it is, compassion in world farming, and it's come to me over the last few years of kind of following the work you do. For anybody who loves animals, sort of whether you eat them or not, it's an absolute no-brainer not to be cruel to an animal, especially if you're going to use them to eat later. But I think your work is stellar, and I think you do it in the right way. There are organisations that, oppose all meat eating, and I guess I kind of oppose it really, but we are where we are in the world, and, you can't stop people doing what they do. But I like your, how can I put it, slow, kind of dogged, persistent, saying the right thing and trying to get MPs and governments to change the way they think. What's your hope? Final question. What's your hope for, say, the next 12 months in terms of what this government, it's not political, not asking you for a political summary on the Labour government, but they did talk about animal welfare prior to being elected. What's your hopes for some real action on some of this from this government?
Yeah, like you say, they can't the exact wording of the manifesto, but it was along the lines of, we will deliver the biggest boost to animal welfare in a generation. In our opinion, given the vast numbers of animals that are farmed in the UK, it's around 1 billion animals, terrestrial animals. You can't really meet that ambition without addressing farmed animal welfare. It's beginning to address farmed animal welfare. The government are in the process of drawing up an animal welfare strategy, which I think the Prime Minister mentioned at Prime Minister's questions last week or the week before.
Yeah.
That's likely to be published later this year. I think November is sort of our understanding at the moment, but and hopefully that won't slide, because we would like them to then have time to begin implementing what is in that strategy. The Minister hinted at it in the debate on Monday, that kind of the use of cages and crates is being considered sort of as part of that strategy. Their response to the labelling consultation also mentioned that the strategy is sort of, they will consider how to address that within the strategy. So I guess step one is we want a really strong and ambitious strategy that tackles some of these. We accept they're not going to address every single issue in the next 5 years.
No.
But there are some that they can address, or at least begin the process of addressing. So certainly introduce the legislation. Could have a very long conversation about kind of what the transition timeline is, out of farrowing crates or away from cages and so on.
It always seems a long time, doesn't it?
Yeah, too long. But some sectors are more advanced. I was going to say cages is going to be about 90% cage free by the end of this year. As a first step, the government could say, well, we're not going to allow the building of any new cage system, and by a certain date. And actually, I think in that sense, they could be quite ambitious. We will phase out the use of all of these cages.
Yeah.
And I say that because when the battery cage ban came in, anybody who moved from a cage system, or from a battery cage rather to an enriched cage, that cage system would only have a certain shelf life, say 20, 25 years. So we're approaching the point where farmers will be thinking about, okay, what do I replace it with? So you say, okay, well, no new cage system. And actually, given you're going to need to replace these within, let's say, 3 to 5 years, that's when they all have to be gone. I mean, in an ideal world, we'd see sort of a similarly ambitious target on other things. I suspect it would end up being slightly longer on farrowing crates, but hopefully kind of not the sort of 15 to 20 years that's being proposed, because it's 2040 by then. It'd be nice to think that we'd have got rid of farrowing crates well before that.
Yeah, for sure. How are you funded?
We are funded roughly split 3 ways from what I remember. I don't work in our fundraising team, so I'm not an expert on this. But
No, that's fine. Just roughly, yeah.
But we don't receive any government funding. We receive about a third of our income comes from individual givers, just people who have a whatever it might be, £3 a month direct debit, or a one-off £20 payment to a particular appeal that we've done. We have organisations or sort of well-off individuals who will kind of donate to specific projects. And then we have, some of our money comes from legacies, essentially people who have said in their will, I would like to leave 5% of my estate to Compassion in World Farming.
Yeah.
And like I say, it's roughly in thirds, is my understanding.
So how do people, anybody that's seen this and thinks, wow, didn't know all that. You guys have got to be across so much detail on this. It must take a lot of people and a lot of reading, a lot of resources to do. So if anybody loves what you're doing and aren't involved with you, where do they go and how easy is it to kind of get involved?
Very easy. We have some sort of local groups. So if people, and they're dotted around the country, so people can kind of meet like-minded people and engage in sort of some local activity, and they're kind of active to varying degrees. But the most straightforward thing is if people go to our website, it's www.ciwf.org. That will take them to our homepage, and on there there will either be kind of a sign up here for more information, or essentially if anybody takes, so the first thing they'll see will be our latest current sort of supporter action, as it were. If somebody takes that, puts in their because it will ask for name, email address, at the very least possibly address, depending on what the action is. At the bottom of that, there'll be a tick box. Do you want to hear more? Tick that box. You will then be on our system, and you will then start to receive emails, which some of them will be fundraising requests, some of them will be kind of just a general monthly update on what we've been up to. Some of them will be sort of click here to email your MP, the government, the European Union, whoever it might be, or sign this petition. This was the case with several emails that we were sending out over the last few months.
And this stuff works, doesn't it? Because you've shown it works. You've shown showing these paths to alert their local MP as to what they feel. These kind of things work, and they do influence people who make these decisions.
Yes. Change is slow. The live exports ban, for example, that we secured last year was sort of 50 years in the making. So, some things come around more quickly than others. Hopefully we won't still be discussing cages in 50 years' time. It's kind of, the more people who support these things and are kind of contacting their MP, contacting the government, or, whatever it might be, using the power of their purse essentially to buy higher welfare product, whatever, that will help sort of raise, because government will look at, how many people are buying a particular product, or what does the polling say? They are alert to public opinion, because you can't be elected without kind of having public support. So the more kind of evident there is support for this, the better in the long run in terms of delivering change.
Absolutely. And that's what you're about. I really appreciate the work you do, James, and your team there at Compassion in World Farming. James West, thank you for talking to me.
Thank you very much.
So whether you eat meat a lot or a little, most of you listening support more compassionate and cruelty-free farming of animals. It's surely time for farmers and the government to stop the delays and legislate to end the cruel practices none of us like to think about happening to sentient beings. Thanks to James West from Compassion in World Farming for saying yes to talking to me. I appreciate all of you have taken the time to watch and listen today. Please go to seanmcginty.co.uk and connect with me on the dullest of all social medias, LinkedIn. You can also find me on X at Sean McGinty. It's possible I'd like to talk to you. DM me if you fancy it. No, I would like to talk to you. Unless you're like completely mad. Actually, then I'd probably like to talk to you as well. But DM me, whatever. I'll be back soon streaming live on LinkedIn and X with another set of Digital Awakenings. Thanks again for listening, watching, whatever. Stay classy, streamers.